Welcome to the Theology Made podcast. I'm Jordan. In today's episode, we're going to look at the theology of Middle-earth. To understand the theology of Middle-earth, you have to begin in a pew. Not a lecture hall, not a battlefield, not a writing desk, but a pew. J.R.R. Tolkien is known for many things. He was a soldier, he was a professor, he was a writer, a storyteller. But before anything else, he was a Catholic. He once wrote in a letter,
The Lord of the Rings is, of course, a fundamentally religious and Catholic work, unconsciously so at first, but consciously in the revision.
And that's crucial. Tolkien didn't sit down to write an allegory the way C.S. Lewis did with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. He hated allegory. In fact, he said,
I cordially dislike allegory in all its manifestations.
That's a nice British way of saying, not a fan. What he loved was what he called applicability, the idea that stories, when deeply rooted in truth, will naturally apply themselves to the reader's imagination. So when Tolkien created Middle-earth, he wasn't trying to make a sermon in disguise, he was creating a world. Because he believed this world was created by God, his fictional world was inevitably shaped by the theological truths he lived and breathed. Tolkien's Catholic imagination was forged in hardship. His father died when he was 4, his mother Mabel converted to Catholicism against her family's wishes, and was cut off from support. She died when Tolkien was 12, leaving him and his brother effectively destitute. Tolkien always called her a martyr for her faith. In a letter he wrote, My own dear mother was a martyr indeed, and it is not to everybody that God grants so easy a way to his great gifts as he did to Hilary and myself, giving us a mother who killed herself with labor and trouble to ensure us keeping the faith. From that point, he was raised under the guardianship of a Catholic priest. So when you read Tolkien, you're not just reading an Oxford Don spinning tales. You're reading someone whose life was haunted by death, shaped by faith, and held together by the sacramental imagination of Catholicism. Nowhere is that imagination clearer than in the opening of the Silmarillion, the Ainulindale, or music of the Ainur. In the beginning, there is not chaos, there's not silence, there is music. Eru Ilúvatar, the One, begins a great theme. The Ainur, angelic beings, take up the theme and weave harmonies together. The cosmos is sung into being. Tolkien is doing theology here. Creation isn't mechanical, it's artistic. The universe is not an accident of atoms colliding, it's a symphony composed by God. And this resonates deeply with Christian tradition. Think about Genesis 1, and God said, Let there be light, and there was light. God creates by speaking, by word. Or John 1, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. The early church fathers picked this up. Athanasius said that when God spoke creation into existence, it was like the Father conducting, the Son is the word sung, and the Spirit is breath carrying the song. Augustine said that creation was God's music of time. So when Tolkien gives us Ilúvatar singing the world into being, he's not just inventing mythology, he's reimagining Christian theology through story. But in that symphony, one voice goes off key. Melkor, the greatest of the Ainur, grows jealous and inserts his own theme, harsh, loud, competitive. At first, it seems to disrupt everything, but Ilúvatar weaves Melkor's discord into a greater harmony, showing that even rebellion cannot derail the ultimate design. That's theology straight from Augustine. Evil, said Augustine, is not a substance in itself. It is parvatio boni, the absence or twisting of good. Evil can't create, it can only corrupt. And think of Genesis 3. The serpent doesn't invent a new reality, he simply twists God's words. Or Romans 1, where Paul describes sin as an exchange of the truth of God for a lie. Tolkien once wrote,
Evil is barren. Melkor could not create living beings of his own, only mockeries and perversions of the designs of others.
That's why orcs are just twisted elves, trolls are mockery of Ents, and the ring is a parody of true power. Evil always distorts what is good. Another thread running through Tolkien's work is Providence. Characters often speak of chance, but Tolkien tips his hat that it's never really chance. When Frodo laments that Bilbo didn't kill Gollum when he had the chance, Gandalf replies,
Do not be too eager to deal out death in judgment. Even the very wise cannot see all ends. My heart tells me that he has some part to play yet, for good or ill, before this is over. The pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many.
And that's not really fate, that's providence. Augustine calls it God's hidden hand. Aquinas said it is God's governance of all creation, guiding free will without erasing it. Paul said in Romans 8:28, "We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." Tolkien rejected the idea of a cold, impersonal destiny. For him, history was the stage on which God's providence played out, often hidden, often mysterious, but always real. Or, as he put it in one of his letters, there was never any luck in the world. Luck is just another name for the grace of God. There's one more key concept in Tolkien's theology of imagination that we can't skip: subcreation. Tolkien believed that because we're made in the image of God, the Creator, we too are creators. Now, not in an ultimate sense. We can't bring something out of nothing. We can't call stars into being or speak galaxies into existence. But we can shape, form, and imagine. We are, as Tolkien called it, sub-creators. Our creativity reflects God's creativity the way moonlight reflects the sun. It is real light, but it is derivative. For Tolkien, this was not just a nice idea. It was a defense of art, poetry, and storytelling itself. He knew some Christians accuse fantasy of being escapist, a way of running away from reality. But his answer is that the gospel is the opposite of escapism. It plunges us deeper into reality than we ever dared to go. And so does good storytelling. In his famous essay on fairy stories, Tolkien wrote,
Fantasy remains a human right. We make still by the law in which we're made.
In other words, God designed us to create. To refuse to create, to imagine, to tell stories is to deny part of the image of God within us. And that is why Tolkien resisted the sneer that fantasy was just for children. He argued fairy stories, myths, and epics were actually the most human thing about us. They train us to see the world, not with dull eyes, but with what he called recovery, seeing things freshly as though for the first time. He explained,
We need, in any case, to clean our windows so that the things seen clearly may be freed from the drab blur of triteness or familiarity.
Think about that. You and I live surrounded by wonders. Bread, water, trees, stars. But routine dulls us. We stop seeing them as gifts. A good story wipes the grime off the glass of our vision so we can see reality again. Not less clearly, but more clearly. So when Tolkien created Middle-earth, he wasn't running away from reality. He was entering into it more deeply. He was sub-creating, a world that echoed the rhythms of creation, fall, redemption, restoration. In doing so, he was worshiping. He once wrote in a letter that we make because we're made. And I think that single line sums it up. Creativity is not a guilty pleasure. It's a form of devotion that when we write, paint, craft, cook a meal that nourishes others, we are reflecting the God who spoke creation into existence and declared it good. And Tolkien took this so seriously that he saw imagination itself as a theological battleground. To reject imagination, to scorn story, was to reject one of the gifts God gave us as image bearers. But to practice imagination humbly, in the service of truth and beauty, was to participate in God's own joy. And that's why Middle-earth feels almost real. It's not an escape from the world, it's a door back into it. When you see elves grieving the fading of their age, you begin to feel the weight of mortality in your own bones. When you watch hobbits delight in second breakfast and fireworks, you recover the joy of simple pleasures. When you follow Frodo up Mount Doom, you come face to face with temptation, despair, and the surprising intrusion of grace. Subcreation is not an alternative to theology. It is theology made tangible. It is faith worked out in myth and melody and prose and poetry. So here's Tolkien's challenge to us. What are you creating? Not necessarily a novel or a fantasy epic, although that might be the case, but with your life, with your words, with your work, with your family. You were made in the image of a creator, and every act of faithful creativity, every sub-creation that reflects truth and beauty is a small act of worship. That's why Tolkien matters. That's why stories matter, because they're not distractions from the real world. They are doors into it. So when you read Tolkien, you're not just wandering through elves and hobbits. You're walking inside a Catholic imagination, a world where creation is music, evil's distortion, providence is real, and every act of creativity is a reflection of the Creator. That's the foundation of Middle-earth. It's also the foundation of theology. But theology doesn't stay abstract for long, because if creation is music and evil is distortion, then the question is, what happens when that discord invades the heart? And that's where we turn next. If creation in Tolkien's world is music, and evil is distortion, then the One Ring is the ultimate discord. It's the theology smelted into metal. The ring doesn't just sit there. It seduces, it whispers, it promises, and the more you hold it, the more it holds you. And this is where Tolkien's theology becomes psychological. because the ring is not only about Middle-earth, it's about us. He once explained that the ring symbolized the will to mere power, seeking to make itself objective. In other words, the ring is the temptation to dominate, to bend others to your will. And that's not just fantasy, that's Genesis 3. The serpent told Eve, "You will be like God." And that's the essence of sin. It's the will to power, to control, to become the center of the story. Aquinas described it as the way the good gift of human will becomes twisted towards selfish ends. Paul puts it in Romans 7, "I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing." And Tolkien, he gives us a ring to hold in our hands and shows how it corrupts everyone who touches it. Take Boromir, captain of Gondor, eldest son of Denethor, a man of courage, discipline, and loyalty. He has spent his life standing on the walls of his city, staring east towards Mordor, guarding his people against the shadow. He is not a coward. He is not a weakling. He is a man who loves his home, his family, his city, and he's willing to die for them. In fact, he does. But when Boromir sees the ring, that nobility begins to twist.
It is a gift, I say. A gift to the foes of Mordor. Why not use this ring?
For Boromir, the ring's not a trinket of greed, it's a weapon. A chance to turn the tide, to save Gondor, to protect the West. His motives, on the surface, are noble. But beneath them lies the oldest temptation, to seize power for ourselves rather than trust in Providence. And in that moment, he snaps. He tries to wrestle the ring from Frodo's hands. He chases him through the woods, panting, desperate, almost pleading, and the desperation looks like madness. Tolkien is showing us something deeply theological. Sin doesn't usually arrive looking like sin. It doesn't storm in with a black coat and a tail and a villain's laugh. It comes disguised as good intentions. Protect your people, defend your home, save the day. All are noble desires, but all were twisted by the lure of absolute power. Paul puts it like this in 2 Corinthians. Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. Sin rarely says, do evil for evil's sake. It whispers, do good. Just bend the rules a little. Boromir isn't a cartoon villain. He isn't Sauron plotting domination. He's far more unsettling. He's us. He is every one of us who has ever justified a sin by saying, I had good reasons. He is every leader who grabs too much power for the greater good. He is every heart that believes the ends justifies the means. And yet, Tolkien doesn't leave Boromir condemned, because in his final moments, he redeems himself. Surrounded by orcs, he sounds the horn of Gondor and fights to the end, pierced by many arrows, defending Merry and Pippin. His last words to Aragorn are a confession.
I tried to take the ring from Frodo. I am sorry. I have paid.
In Boromir, Tolkien shows us both the danger of pride and the possibility of repentance. The noble who falls, but also the sinner who dies with courage, humility, and sorrow. And then there's Gollum. Once he was Smeagol, a curious hobbit-like creature. On his birthday, he found the ring, or we should say it found him. His friend discovered it while fishing, and Smeagol's desire was so fierce that he strangled him for it. One moment of grasping and a lifetime of ruin. Over the centuries, the ring consumed him. His body shrivels, mind fractures, soul collapses inward. He hides in caves, muttering, obsessing. He calls it,
my precious.
And in one haunting moment, he hisses,
we wants it. We needs it. Must have the precious. They stole it from us sneaky little hobbitses.
Gollum is sin incarnate. He is addiction embodied. He knows the ring is destroying him, but he cannot let go. And the longer he clings, the more it clings to him. Augustine once confessed in his Confessions, the enemy had a grip on my will, and from it he made a chain and shackled me. For my will was perverse, and lust had grown from it, and when I gave into lust, habit was born, and when I did not resist the habit, it became a necessity. That's Gollum. That's us, shackled to our precious even when it destroys us. And here's the tragedy. Gollum is not a pure monster. Tolkien makes us feel pity for him. Gandalf warns Frodo, do not be too eager to deal out death and judgment. Even the very wise cannot see all ends. Gandalf's point is that Gollum, broken as he is, may still have a role to play in Providence. And he does. His obsession, his fall, becomes the very thing that destroys the ring. Gollum reminds us that even the most enslaved sinner is not beyond the reach of God's mysterious providence. And then Frodo. Now surely Frodo, the humble hobbit, the reluctant hero, the ring bearer, will resist. He doesn't seek glory, he doesn't crave power, he just wants to go back to the Shire. He carries the ring step by agonizing step, Through snow, marsh, mountain, and desert, he resists its whispers, its weight, its pull. He's bruised, battered, hollowed by the journey, and yet he presses on. But in the final moment, standing at the cracks of doom, Frodo falters. I do not choose now to do what I came to do. I will not do this deed. The ring is mine. And the line shocks readers every time. After hundreds of pages, so many sacrifices, Frodo claims the ring for himself. And Tolkien doesn't let us look away. The truth is uncomfortable. Even the hero fails. Even the best of us, the most faithful, cannot save ourselves. Because salvation never comes from human effort. Frodo is not Christ. He cannot bear the full weight of evil and emerge victorious. His failure is the point. It's grace that saves the day through Gollum's fall, through Providence twisting every obsession into redemption. And that's pure theology. Paul says in Romans 3:23, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Frodo's fall makes that literal. But just as Paul continues in Romans 3:24, and all are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus. The quest is accomplished not by Frodo's perfection, but by grace working in spite of his weakness. Tolkien once wrote that The Lord of the Rings is about the theme of death and the possibility of deathless hope. Frodo, he embodies that tension. He carries the ring bravely, but not flawlessly. He bears the burden faithfully, but not perfectly. His failure shows us what theology has always taught. There is one Savior, and it isn't Frodo Baggins. So what happens? Gollum, in his obsession, bites off Frodo's finger, seizes the ring, and falls into the fire. Evil devours itself. The quest is completed not by Frodo's strength, but by providence. Tolkien called this a pattern of grace operating through the failure of men. Paul put it this way, where sin increased, grace abounded all the more. God takes even our failures and turns them into instruments of redemption. That's the gospel in Middle-earth. Salvation is never earned, it's given. Now, before we shake our heads at Frodo or laugh at Gollum, Tolkien forces us to ask, what is our ring? Maybe it's the ring of ambition, the belief that if we just climb high enough, we'll be secure. Maybe it's the ring of control, trying to bend family, career, or church to our will. Maybe it's the ring of technology, the phone we can't put down, the platform that's promising connection but actually enslaving us. The ring is not fantasy, it's a parable of our hearts. And it brings us to a theological debate that has raged for centuries. Is the will free or bound? Pelagius argued humans can choose the good by sheer willpower. Augustine countered, no, our will is enslaved to sin until grace frees it. Martin Luther in The Bondage of the Will said, the will is like a beast of burden. Don't think Rolling Stones, think theology. If God rides it, it wills and goes where God wills. If Satan rides it, it wills and goes where Satan wills. Tolkien lands firmly with Augustine, and we can't necessarily say Luther because Tolkien was a Catholic. But the ring shows that even the best intentions are bent by sin. Frodo can't save himself. None of us can. And yet, Tolkien's providence shines. Gollum's evil becomes the means of salvation. Sam's loyalty keeps Frodo alive. The fellowship, broken though it is, carries him forward. Grace weaves even failure into redemption. Or as Gandalf says earlier, all we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. And that's theology in a nutshell. We don't write the story, but we're called to faithfulness within it. So the ring is more than a plot device. It's a mirror. It shows us the corruption of the heart, the futility of self-salvation, and the surprise of grace. And yet the story doesn't end in despair. Because in Middle-earth, just when all hope seems lost, that's when hope breaks in. Middle-earth, full of darkness. Orcs march. Sauron's eyes burn, even Frodo falters, and yet somehow hope keeps breaking through. Tolkien gave this hope a name, Eucatastrophe. He coined the word in his essay on fairy tales, and he defined it as the sudden, joyous turn, for there is no true end to any fairy tale without it. It's the moment when the story seems doomed, but salvation arrives in an unexpected way. The eagles descend, the ring is destroyed, the dawn breaks. It's catastrophe, but good. A good catastrophe. And for Tolkien, this wasn't just a literary device, it was theology. He wrote, the resurrection is the eucatastrophe of the story of the incarnation. The story begins and ends in joy. And this is the pattern in Middle-earth. You see eucatastrophe everywhere in Tolkien's writing. Helm's Deep, when the fortress is about to fall, Gandalf arrives with the riders of Rohan. Mordor, when Frodo fails, Gollum's fall destroys the ring. The Shire, after Saruman's scoring, the hobbits rebuild, darkness lingers, but hope prevails. And just kind of notice the pattern. Hope arrives not through strength, but through weakness, surprise, and grace. This is the gospel woven into myth. And one of the most haunting lines comes when Sam, waking from the destruction of the ring, sees Gandalf alive. Gandalf, I thought you were dead, but then I thought I was dead myself. Is everything sad going to come untrue? What's happened to the world? And that question, is everything sad going to come untrue, is pure eschatology. It is declaring Revelation 21, he will wipe away every tear from their eye. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. Tolkien gives us not escapism, but hope. Hope that the very sadness we carry, grief, scars, wounds, they're not final. And yet, Tolkien doesn't end with cheap triumph. Frodo is not healed in the Shire. He is restless, wounded, unable to return to normal. He says, I tried to save the Shire, and it's been saved, but not for me. It must often be so, Sam. When things are in danger, someone has to give them up, lose them, so that others may keep them. And that's the theology of the cross. Even redeemed, the world bears scars. Paul speaks of carrying a thorn in the flesh. Christ himself, risen, still bore wounds in his hands. Tolkien shows us salvation is real, but so are scars. And those scars will only be finally healed in the ultimate Eucatastrophe, the return of Christ. The final chapter of The Lord of the Rings is bittersweet. Frodo boards the ship to the undying lands. Sam watches as his friend sails away. It's a picture of death, but also hope. Frodo's pain is not erased, but it is finally given rest. Tolkien never confuses the undying lands with heaven. It's more like a foretaste, a longing. He knew true end is not escape to another realm, but resurrection of this one. Still, the Grey Havens remind us the story is not over. The best is yet to come. So what does this mean for us here and now? I think first is that hope is not naive optimism. It's forged in fire. It comes when all seems lost and God still acts. Second, salvation's by grace, not strength. Frodo's failure turned into victory shows us that we cannot boast in our own willpower. And third, our scars matter. Christianity does not promise an easy fix, but ultimate restoration. Tolkien helps us to imagine what theologians struggle to put into words, that the gospel is the true myth, the story that makes sense of every other story. So when you close The Lord of the Rings, you haven't just read a fantasy epic. You've stepped into a theology of hope. A world sung into being, evil that corrupts but cannot create, a ring that exposes the heart, a providence that weaves even failure into grace, and a hope that all sad things will one day come untrue. That's not just Tolkien's story. That's the gospel. Because Middle-earth points to a greater story, one where the smallest person can change the world because God himself became small. One where the greatest Eucatastrophe was not a ring destroyed, but a stone rolled away. Thanks for joining me on Theology Made. If this deep dive into Tolkien's imagination stirred you, share it with a friend who loves Lord of the Rings. Better yet, use it as a doorway into the gospel, the true myth behind every story.